Now, Jay Naidoo was a tireless anti-apartheid campaigner in the 1980s, serving as the first General Secretary of COATSU, South Africa's largest union federation, and the backbone of the internal mass struggles against apartheid. In 1994, he was asked by President Nelson Mandela to join his government, which was the first ever black-led government in South Africa. He served as his Minister of Reconstruction and Development. But when Mandela left leadership, he left too, because he says he's not a politician, but he is a political activist. And there is a big difference between the two. Jay is in the country courtesy of the Society for International Development Kenyan Dialogue Project, where they're seeking to answer this probing question. The public benefit organization, is it blurring the distinction between public and political interest? And also joining him this morning is Honorable Sophia Abdinu, MP Garissa County, who is also the chair of the Labour and Social Welfare Committee in Parliament. And I will walk over to the other side of the studio to engage on this pertinent issue. We talk about good governance, and of course we get to know a little bit of Jay Naidoo, who also was named by the African New Magazine as one of the most influential person in Africa in the list of 100 of them that they picked. A warm welcome to you, Jay Naidoo, to Nairobi, Kenya.
Thank you very much. Pleasure to be here.
Honorable Sophie Abdinu, karibu sana. Umeamka mapema leo, eh?
Always.
I'm telling her that, yeah, she's waking up very early, you as well, today, to be here for the breakfast show. All right, thank you. Let's just get to get into the issue quickly. Jay, we start with you, of course. Well, we want Kenyans to really know who Jay Naidoo is. And of course, I've read a bit of the introduction there. So we have a snippet of information that also,
yes.
Of course, you are also in government, serving with President Nelson Mandela in South Africa. But when he left, you left too. And you say you're not a politician?
I'm not a politician. No.
You're a political
I'm
activist.
political. You know,
right,
everything in the world is political, you know. So I continue to be an activist. I also serve on the board of the Mo Ibrahim Foundation, which focuses on leadership and governance in Africa.
Yes.
Asking very pertinent questions about why such a rich continent we still continue to be poor.
Mm-hmm. All right. Now, you lived under apartheid when you were 4 years old, and you were evicted from your home because you are from the wrong color. Is that
Yes,
true?
that's absolutely true.
All right, tell us more about that, as you said, the background.
Well,
of this
you know,
discussion.
that was the time of the most terrible tragedy of the 20th century, racial discrimination,
Yes.
which really hid a system of cheap labor. You know, the real content of apartheid was exploiting black people in order to make them work in the mines and the factories at starvation wages. And so we naturally, because of our experience, stood up and fought for justice. When I was 15 years old, I went to listen to Steve Biko. And I can remember that speech as if it was yesterday. You know, we have nothing to lose but your chains. And, you know, you can choose to be a bystander and accept apartheid, or you could choose to stand up and fight for freedom. You may die in that process, but your death would be honorable. So that's what made many of us stand up in 1976 in our millions as students and take on the apartheid government. We were smashed, but we went back and we organized so that 18 years later we were able to put our founding father, Nelson Mandela, as the first democratically elected president of our country.
All right. And of course, also in the church then, while Steve Biko was giving his speech,
Yes.
you had an epiphany from his speech. There's something that has really stayed with you.
Yes.
He said that liberation can only start once you liberate your mind. And you've never forgotten that. And that one gave you, should I say, the oomph now to become the political activist that you've been all through your career, not as a politician, but as an activist. Tell us more about that.
Well, you know, I think the most important thing about Steve Biko
Yes.
is he made us proud to be black. When we were growing up, we actually believed we were inferior to white people,
Yes.
because that's how we were taught. And when they smashed the African National Congress and thousands fled into exile and people went to jail, we grew up in an environment where we believed we were inferior. And Steve Biko said that the freedom struggle starts when you free your own mind and start to believe that you are a human being equal to any other human being. irrespective of their color, their race, their gender, their religion, their culture. We are all part of one human race. And once you recognize that you are a human being and you have equal human rights to anyone else in the world,
yes,
that's the beginning of liberation and freedom in a society. And that's something that I believe even today, that people who divide us according to tribe, according to ethnicity, according to religion, color, or race, cannot be leaders. What we need are leaders that unify us on the basis that we are one human race, we have one planet, and we have to learn to live together peacefully and share the prosperity of the wealth that we create in a country or a continent or the world.
All right, and so you're in the country now, courtesy of the Society for International Development, the Kenya Dialogue Project, of which also Honorable Sophie Abdinurushi is a member of the committee. And you're one of the panelists who has been also sharing your experience and also your sentiments in this particular conference, so to speak. And Sophie, you were here. Also, you've been a stalwart of advocating for, the marginalized in the society through the NGOs. I've seen going through some of the articles that I've seen on the internet. You've been heavily involved in trying to speak for the people who are marginalized in the society. And one of the biggest issue that we're having also in the country right now has been, the rift that has been seen between the government and the NGO world, especially with the Public Benefit Organization Act, right, of which the president has assented to, but it has not been now effected, so to speak. Tell us more about this and why also we have Jay in the country to really come and speak in the conference.
Thank you so much. As you know, I've been involved in the civil society organization for over 25 years.
Yes.
And I'm a believer of human rights.
Yes.
And an activist. And today I'm lucky I'm sharing a platform with my brother, whom I've admired from very far. And I've come from a society that have been marginalized and discriminated against for many years.
Yes.
If you remember, we were under emergency law until 1997 when that law was lifted from northern part of Kenya. And because of that, as a young lady, I felt I needed to speak for the people.
Yes.
It was difficult at that time for people to come and talk about human rights, to talk about space, to create space. And I felt if I didn't give myself an opportunity to stand up for the people, who else will come over and to talk for the people? So that is my background. I have been always in the forefront talking for the right of the disadvantaged persons,
Yes.
the marginalized, and the woman in particular. And when I came to Parliament, I felt I had an agenda. And God gave me that opportunity and platform to complete the agenda I had in life.
Yes.
And I started now advocating, and lucky enough, I was given an opportunity to sit in the Constitutional Review Committee in Parliament.
Yes.
When I sat there, I heavily contributed on issues. If you look at the Constitution, you will see public participation. That comes from the civil society organization. And because I was there and several of my colleagues who had that background were there, that is our idea, so that we could involve the public to participate in all decision making of this country, because they are the supreme. They are the ones who are delegating and donating the power to the people who are in place. So that gave me an opportunity. The other thing is, if you look at the Constitution, we were able to put the words like marginalization, discrimination, and minority, and women and persons with disability.
Yes.
All that is coming from some of us. So I'm very happy that I was able to contribute that into the Constitution. Then when it comes to the Public Benefit Organization, which I sponsored in the Parliament,
Yes.
is an act of Parliament which the President assented to in January 2013. And the problem we have today is that it is not effected so that it can be implemented. So what we are asking from the government, and particularly the Cabinet Secretary of Devolution and Planning, where the PPO Act falls under the docket. PPO Act is an act that replaced the formerly known, the NGO and the Non-Governmental Organization Act, which was there. It has a membership of 8,800 members.
Yes.
And it targets over 10 million Kenyans. So it is that important today. It employs 250,000 Kenyans. So it's an act that addresses critical issues. It brings into this country over 152 billion
All right.
annually.
All right, we'll explore more of that, because also the NGO world was really against this PPO Act in the first place. Was it misinformation that you had, that they were really, not agreeing with every article that was within that particular bill then, which is an act by now, or what was the main issue, right? But let me rope in Jay. Jay, we are talking about good governance generally, and of course you've been a stalwart of advocating for good governance, especially in Africa with the Mo Ibrahim Foundation, and it's very consternating that during the year 2012, none of the African leaders actually got the award from Mo Ibrahim Foundation on issues of good governance. Is this maybe epitomizing the state of Africa, that we do not have good governance? Or maybe did you up the ante in terms of standards that none of them really were up to scratch?
I think the award in the Mo Ibrahim Foundation for good governance is for excellence in leadership. It's not just for being elected democratically as a president and leaving in terms of the constitution, usually after serving 2 terms. You have to prove that you have contributed to social cohesion, towards delivering jobs, towards being a role model. And we have a very small pool, because there's 54 countries in Africa. Not every president retires at the same time. So you have a small pool. But over the last 6 years, there are 3 people that have got the award. President Pires from Cape Verde, there's President Chisano from Mozambique, there's President Festus Mogae from Botswana. So you've got a rate of 1 every 2 years receiving it. Now, take an equivalent of Europe. And let's measure in the last 6 years, which European head of state would have gotten a Mo Ibrahim Prize? I cannot think of one. I can't think of one American president in the last few administrations that we as a board of the Mo Ibrahim Foundation would give an award to. So I don't think that it's that Africa does not have good leaders. I think that we must understand that this award is for exceptional leadership while being the executive head of state.
Yes.
And that's what entitles you to the award.
But you also expressed your admiration for President Jacob Chisano. You say, if I was to elect another leader, it will be Chisano. Why Chisano?
Because there's a notion of a servant leader. Nelson Mandela taught us that. A good leader is a leader that has a good head and a good heart. That means has a strategic mind about identifying what the challenges the country faces, having the sincerity and compassion and humility in his heart to serve the people and not serve their own personal interests. I think Joachim Chisano, Festus Mogae, and President Pires represent that ideal of a leader that we are all so hungry for in Africa. They have served their countries. President Chisano has solved and resolved a devastating civil war, sat down with his opponent that he fought a war with, invited him into government, had a democratic election, stepped down at the right time, and in his whole time as president continued to build bridges between differing tribes, differing tendency, differing factions in his country.
Yes.
He continues to do that even today. He's one of the African Union's chief envoys into strife-torn countries, trying to build bridges between people who have differences and that would prefer to use peaceful means to resolve disputes. So I think that's the type of leader we have, that we aspire to in Africa, because we are a rich continent. We are rich under the ground, yet we remain poor above ground. And a lot of that challenge comes back to what is the leadership that understands that our people are the most important resource. And if you combine that with the resources, 1/3 of the mineral wealth of the world is in Africa. You know, 60% of the remaining arable land is in Africa. If you look at the water, the forests, the oceans, we have tremendous resources to make Africa the center of the world, to make the 21st century an African century. And it requires good governance, and it requires good leadership.
So he epitomized also good governance, because he went to the ground and worked also with the farmers. In a sense, we can say Chissano was the Che Guevara of Africa.
Well, you know, I've been with him many times. And when I go down to the ground with him amongst peasants, there are people who treat him with such honor, but they don't. If you see him in the fields with people, you will never know that he was president.
Yes.
Because he doesn't show that. He doesn't arrive with security guards, with big cavalcades. He doesn't, you know, we were standing
oozing
in the
opulence,
fields, in mud, and he's talking to his people. He's one of them, and I think that's the type of leadership we want, you know, is that being elected to office, like Mandela said to us, does not entitle you to be above the people. You've got to serve the people. That means you've got to be part of the people. And you've got to demonstrate that and be a role model of that type of leadership.
Right. Okay, we can talk now about the conference with the PBO Act itself. And we are trying to, you know, bridge the gap that is widening, because now it seems that the sector, the NGO sector, is becoming a bit wary of the executive with their decisions as well. And there's this rift that is widening right now. What ways or mechanism can we use to bridge this gap? And why is it taking too long for the Ministry of Devolution and Planning to try and operationalize the Act itself?
And I really can't give an answer why they are not. But
could be the pundits be right? They're saying, of course, maybe also the government is, you know, gagging for the international funding as well, because that was the biggest issue when they said this will be the quota, 15% from the donor funding world.
You know what happened is in the miscellaneous amendment bill, we had 13 amendments on the PPO. And one of the major amendment was on the funding of the public benefit organizations. And they were capping the resources that were coming from the international community. And that gave an issue. And what we did was we mobilized ourselves, and we started now trying to reach out to the leadership of parliament, the leadership of this country, and to talk to them and tell them the reason why public benefit organization is important to this country and what kind of services they are supplementing the government effort. The primary duty bearer of services are the government, but the PBO are coming on board just to supplement the government efforts. And if you look at the Public Benefit Organization Act, it clearly tells you that the civil society organizations will, in a structured manner, will partner with the government of the day so that to give proper services and to the people of this nation. So public benefit organizations are is an act that is creating an enabling environment for the public benefit organization membership, and it is giving, they have given themselves a responsibility of being transparent. You know, from the previous NGOs, there were always issues of accountability, corruption, and all that. This is what is
that is a
now,
chicken wire,
and this act is an act that is creating accountability among the civil society organization, because civil society organizations themselves sat down. This has gone through a huge process, whereas public benefit organizations met on several times. They have gone all around the country to sit with all membership of the public benefit organizations, and they decided that they do not need to always hear that the sector is corrupt.
All right, but you know, I'm trying to understand, because I think the main issue why we're having mistrust, especially from the government with the NGO world, is, as you say, transparency in the first place, right? Because they think this has been a conduit of, you know, of extending the expansive hand of corruption in this country. You refuse to actually, for your accounts to be, audited, right? That has been a ticklish issue, but we'll explore more of that. But maybe I would like to pick the mind of Jay, because experientially you've been the Minister of Reconstruction and Development, and I believe also within that docket, maybe it was within your remit to liaise with NGO world. Experientially, if we may pick out some of the salient issues that you saw within the ministry, working with the NGOs, what are some of the pertinent issues that was there, trying to harmonize the relationship between the government and the NGO world?
Well, let's understand the history in South Africa. The
Yes.
history of the freedom struggle resulted in tens of thousands of NGOs
Yes.
emerging in South Africa, providing water and education and literacy and fighting for human rights or social justice. So the history of South Africa is very much driven by a rich, array of non-governmental organizations that fought for freedom. And so when we went into government and developed the constitution, what we had entrenched there
Yes.
is the principle of freedom of speech,
Yes.
freedom of assembly, and then freedom to organize yourselves. So that is constitutional principle.
Yes.
And so when we went into government, we recognized that. And then we actually set up what is called the National Development Agency, which appropriated part of the fiscus to help grow the NGO sector. And so we have a very open system, and in the sense that NGOs can exist. There is a registration and certification process, which means that it's not it's administrative rather than political. And so NGOs are very free, and they operate in a system where many of them are very critical of government. And yet government accepts that that's the principle.
Now, in terms maybe of capping, as we're winding up, did you have any quota? Because with this act came also the 15%, of course, of what the NGO world can receive from the donor world.
Well, we had a very strong resistance to that. The apartheid government tried to insist that it wanted to regulate any inflow of capital, of finances going to the NGO sector, and there was tremendous resistance to that.
Yeah.
So,
but
no,
what was the rhyme and reason for you resisting, or from the NGO resisting?
because the NGO sector is non-governmental. One must understand that today the world of development is not just driven by governments. There are tremendously important non-state actors that play a role in development, whether that's the business sector, the social business sector, with the non-profit business organizations, whether that's NGOs, whether that's academia. The technology revolution has given the right of citizens to have a say in development, to raise their views on development. The net is free. And so freedom of speech cannot be suppressed. So my view is that, yes, when I was a minister, I was also a minister of communications. I had to go and restructure state institutions. And even in the discussions with the trade unions, which I was the founding general secretary of, I was called names and insulted. And yes, you've got to have a thick skin if you're in the public service, because in a sense, the NGO sector is like a safety valve. That people who have genuine grievances need an outlet, and the NGO sector gives people an outlet. And so yes, from a side of government, it's very important to understand that and partner with that.
Yeah.
And focus on what the shared interests, because at the end of the day, what do we all want? Whether you're in the NGO sector, you're in media, you're in government, you're in business, you want the country to be stable, you want it to succeed, you want people to share the prosperity. And all of us have to sit around the table and talk about it. Mandela could sit with people who put him in jail for 27 years, that killed a lot of the people that were people who are comrades, people who are family. But we sat in the cabinet with people who had me on their death list. I could sit with people like that. Why can't I sit with people who someone who just calls me a name, who maybe is criticizing me without the real facts? So maybe let's sit down, establish the facts. I may be wrong, I may be right, but at the end of the day, we can sit and solve the problem rather than pretending there is no problem.
All right. Oh, okay, Honorable Sophie, As we're winding up, what are some of the silent issues that you're discussing in this particular conference, the dialogue that you're holding right now? And what are you looking for? Are you seeing it will make any discernible difference that now you're trying also to get the attention of the government and asking pertinent questions? Why is the act not being operationalized after it has been assented by the president?
And first I want to just tell you that in Kenya too,
Yes.
we have an accountability mechanism in place where every NGO accounts to the government.
Yes.
We have a system. We have the NGO Coordination Bureau, which is a government department in Kenya. We have the NGO Council, which now has a problem. That's why we came with the PPO bill to restructure the problem that was faced at the NGO Council. So what happens is every NGO in this country, at the end of the year, present an audited report to the NGO Bureau, which is a government department.
Yes.
And that department, usually if they get an issue, they go around this country to find out what the problem is. So there have been some system in place, but that system had an issue. That's why we wanted to restructure. And that's why we came with the Public Benefit Organizational Bill. And this act is an act that is you know, in itself has a mechanism of regulation, administration, and accountability and transparency, which itself has its own way of monitoring and evaluating the whole sector. So what we are asking from the government is that we want the government to give effect to the implementation of the act.
Yes.
And what we are saying is, and in the act, we will have a regulatory arm of the sector, and we'll have a federation where the NGO Council will have a federation of membership, and will have, it is official, who will always be a check and backstopping on issues that will affect the sector. So what we are demanding from the minister in charge is that she puts a date, commencement date, so that we put the federation in place, and we put the regulation committee who will come on board immediately. Because as it is now, we have an act which is shelved somewhere. It is not being implemented, and as civil society organization and membership of this country, people are feeling that and with the amendments which were there, the 13 amendments,
Yes.
with the implementation not coming on board, then they feel that their space, which constitutionally is allowed, freedom of speech, freedom of association, freedom of, you know, opinions, freedom of participation, freedom of assembly, is being infringed on.
All right, and you remember today, as we're winding up, the Cabinet Secretary will be giving a briefing, yeah? The third cluster of the secretaries that
I
will be
think you
giving.
will ask.
Yeah, that question you need to pose to the Cabinet Secretary today. Thank you very much for coming. Jay Naidoo, I really appreciate you also
Thank you
coming
very
this
much.
morning.
That's
Of
great
course, we're
pleasure.
strapped for time. There's so much to talk about government. We
Yes.
cannot exhaust it on this particular program, but we
Absolutely.
really do appreciate you coming today. Thank you very much.
Thank
And of course,
you.
we'll be following what will be happening at the dialogue. Right, thank you. Well, we've been speaking to Jay Naidoo, right, Honorable Jay Naidoo, who was the former minister in Mandela's government, Minister of Reconstruction and Development, and also is a partner with the Society of International Development, who are holding talks here in the country, trying to bridge the gap between, you know, the NGO world and the government. They're holding discussions on also how the PBO Act will be enacted or operationalized. Up to now, since the president assented to it, it has not been operationalized. That is what they're seeking to know, why it is not effected up to now. So don't go away, much more coming up on the other side of a break.